Hi everyone, good morning. So today I will talk about trait prioritization and economic modeling to guide strategic decision in pea breeding program. This is a collaboration between Abacus Bio and Alberta Pulse Growers. Here we can see the global seven top producers in the world for peas, and Canada is leading the position with 31% representation. According to iGrain India, Canada's 2024 pea production was around 3 million tons, and this corresponds to approximately 15% higher production than what we had in 2023. The three traits that we considered in this project was yield in tons per hectare, protein content in percentage, and fusarium resistance in a rating unit from 1 to 9. Now, breeders, they have a challenge as they must balance trade-off between those traits, and sometimes those traits can have unfavorable correlation for the selection process. Therefore, the main objective of this project was to understand the current breeding program's impact for pea growers in Alberta and Western Canada, and also estimate the benefits of implementing bioeconomic selection indexes. To do that, we simulated a pea breeding program using AlphaSemar. We accounted for 10 years of burning, 20 years of breeding program, and we evaluated 4 different scenarios. We repeated the simulations 10 times to check if the results was consistent across the different runs. This is the breeding program scheme for the peas, and we have the parents being crossing, getting the F1. Then in F2, we applied genomic selection and speed breeding until F6. From F7, we applied evaluation trials. So we had the preliminary wild trial, multi-environment trial, and cooperative trials. We also simulated multiple breeding cycles running parallel. This allowed a release of cultivar every year from the breeding program. For the traits, yield and protein was simulated, considered genetic additive effects following a normal distribution with the correspondent mean and variance, and heritability and correlation was collected from literature. Here I want to emphasize that the correlation is negative for yield and protein, which is quite unfavorable as we want to increase both yield and protein at the same time. For fusarium resistance trait, because this is not a quantitative trait, we simulated that differently. We added specific additive effects for 9 KTLs using the import trait function. And heritability comes from the same citation as the additive effects. For the breeding program scenarios, we evaluated 4 scenarios, but basically is the baseline compared to scenarios implementing selection indexes, which is 2A, 2B, and 2C. For the baseline, the primary focus of selection was yield. Candidate that has higher yield was selected and then submitted to culling thresholds for protein and fusarium. So candidates with high than 24% of protein and a lower rating, lower than 6 for fusarium, was selected and moved forward in the breeding program. For the selection index scenarios, we applied economic values for yield and fusarium for all of the selection index scenarios, and they differ in the way how we treated protein. So in the first one, we considered protein, we treated protein similar to the baseline, so we used a culling threshold. In the second one, we added an economic value for protein as this would give us the best trade-off among the traits, and there was a desire from the breeders to increase further protein. Just one highlight that this scenario is hypothetical here because the economic value for protein assumed that growers would receive a premium for high protein, which is currently not implemented in Canada. So in Canada, growers do not receive any reward for having high candidate proteins. Because this is quite speculative, we also added a third a third scenario where we applied the selection index for the two traits, yield and fusarium, and we had no constraint for protein, so we just monitored and saw how the selection index was affecting the response in the protein as well. For the economic values for yield was quite straightforward. This is equal to the market price, as yield directly translates to revenue. Now, protein and fusarium, it's different. We needed to transform the trait units into a measurable economic consequence, and therefore protein was transformed into the likelihood of earning a premium if it's over a threshold, and fusarium was transformed into the expected yield loss, factoring for the exposure of fusarium to the specific environment. So these two nonlinear approach, they are quite different, and it means different for each of these traits. So for the first one, for protein, what we have is basically two points here. One where we started to receive a premium, and the second point here is when it gets to a plateau. So basically, it means that candidates are not over-rewarded with high protein levels, so that there is a plateau where there is no more additional reward. For fusarium, it's different. So as we increase in the trait unit, as we increase in disease loss, there is more and more penalty for those candidates. Here we can see the results and how these three traits vary over the 20 years of the breeding program for all the 4 scenarios. So in the y-axis, we have the relative trait value, which is basically the value of the trait in a specific year minus the initial point. This initial point is after the burning and the beginning of the breeding scenarios. And this is because we wanted to see the impact of implementing these scenarios from the beginning until the end of the breeding program. How the traits would increase or decrease with these scenarios. For yield, it's not a surprise. We have that the highest yield was achieved with the baseline scenario, which was primarily focused on yield selection. For protein content, here we have the more variability of interpretation because protein was treated differently in the different scenarios. So we have in the light blue line and the dark blue line, they are quite similar, and this is because both 1 and 2A scenarios was using a culling threshold, so the same approach for protein here. Now, for the green line, we can see the protein be increasing as the breeders was desiring, but this comes at the expense of the progress in yield. So if you see yield for the green line, it didn't increase too much, and we will see the impact, the financial impact of that in the next few slides. In orange, we can see protein dropping, and this is because in this scenario we didn't account for protein at all, and because of the negative correlation of protein and yield, we are increasing yield for the orange line, then consequently we are decreasing protein. For fusarium, it was quite consistent. Implementing selection indexes was efficient in reducing the fusarium disease, which is desired for the breeding program. Another important result is the economic impact of each of these scenarios. So here we have the present value of benefits, the total value for each of the breeding program, considering the premium for protein and without considering this benefit for protein. And this is important because we need to check what we have in reality. So basically, let's go for the total with benefits. Baseline, we got a total benefit of $300 million. And just applying selection indexes, we was able to more than double this benefit in values. with the highest benefit come from the economic values for all of the three traits, the best trade-off between these three traits. However, as we know that this is hypothetical and growers do not receive any benefit, in reality, if we implemented this scenario in Canada, we would get just $392 million. So then, the second best scenario would be applying economic values only for yield and fusarium. But here again, we could go very wrong with protein because of the negative correlation. So this is quite a rash selection process and might not be desired for the breeding program in the future. Therefore, we conclude that the best scenario would be to implement economic values for yield and fusarium and keep the threshold of protein as a culling threshold, would give us $733 million. And consider this scenario 2A as the most representative of the near future breeding program and the near future operating costs. We estimated increase in the return of investment from 14 to 19%, just adding economic values to yield and fusarium. As a conclusion, we got that trait prioritization and economic modeling can guide strategic breeding decisions and maximize long-term value for the breeding program. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any question.